Philadelphia in the 1760s was a city that smelled of tar and salt water, its wharves stacked with hogsheads of tobacco and bolts of English cloth. Robert Morris had clawed his way up from an apprentice counting house clerk to become one of the most powerful merchant traders on the Atlantic seaboard, a man who understood that credit was not just money. It was trust made tangible. He was born in Liverpool in 1734 and arrived in Maryland as a boy, which meant he carried the instincts of the British commercial world even as he prepared to help dismantle British rule. That tension between profit and principle would define everything he did next. When the Continental Congress debated independence in the summer of 1776, Morris actually abstained on the final vote. He thought the timing wrong, the colonies unprepared. Yet the moment the declaration passed, he signed it anyway, judging that loyalty to the cause outweighed his private doubts. This was not cynicism. It was the logic of a man who had spent his career honoring contracts, even when markets turned against him. What this decision cost him personally, the coming years would make brutally clear. By late 1776, the Continental Army was hemorrhaging. Washington's forces had retreated across New Jersey, and enlistments were expiring by the thousands. Congress had fled Philadelphia for Baltimore, leaving Morris behind as essentially a one-man emergency government. He personally negotiated short-term loans and advanced cash from his own mercantile accounts to fund the surprise crossing of the Delaware on December 25th, the attack on Trenton that reversed the Revolution's momentum. The army that won that night was, in a very direct financial sense, his army. Morris understood something Congress refused to accept. The Continental dollar was collapsing because it was backed by nothing but promises. Inflation gutted soldier pay. Farmers hid grain rather than accept worthless paper. Morris began routing hard currency, Spanish silver, French gold, through his own trading network, using commercial relationships built over decades to move specie where the government could not. But his methods blurred the line between public service and private gain, and critics were already sharpening their knives. The question of whose money was whose would haunt him for the rest of his life. In 1781, Congress handed Morris the job no one else wanted, Superintendent of Finance, effectively the first Treasury Secretary of the United States, with a broken currency and an empty vault. He moved fast. He founded the Bank of North America, the first chartered bank in the country, using a combination of French loans and his own pledged assets as the initial capital. He slashed government contracts, introduced competitive bidding, and forced suppliers to accept accountability. Soldiers who had not been paid in months began receiving something. Not everything, but something, and that difference held the army together through Yorktown. Yorktown in October 1781 is remembered as Washington's victory and Rochambeau's march. But the movement of that Franco-American army down the coast required cash. Cash to hire wagons, feed horses, and keep Allied commanders from abandoning the campaign. Morris scrambled to provide it, at one point personally endorsing notes that he had no certainty of redeeming. The British surrender followed weeks later. What almost no history textbook records is that Morris was drafting emergency financing schemes the entire time Cornwallis was deciding whether to surrender. After the war, Morris was the most financially sophisticated man in a country that desperately needed him, and then lost him to his own ambition. Land speculation in Western territories consumed his post-war years and fortune. By 1798, he was imprisoned for debt in a Philadelphia jail, the same city where he had once bankrolled a nation. Washington visited him there. It was not a long visit. Morris spent roughly 3 years imprisoned before new bankruptcy legislation finally released him, a broken figure who died in 1806 with little money and less fame. The arc of Robert Morris is not really a tragedy about greed. It is a revelation about how republics consume the people they need most. He provided the financial architecture without which the revolution would almost certainly have collapsed before Yorktown, and the country repaid him with obscurity while leonizing the generals he had funded. His story asks something uncomfortable. Every society decides which kinds of labor it chooses to remember, and the unglamorous work of keeping institutions solvent tends to vanish into the ledger. The bills still get paid, The names on them do not survive.